This podcast is brought to you thanks to the generous support of Whistler Blackcomb, leaders in delivering adventure.
But as more and more came down and some of the weaker skiers came down, there were wipeouts, crashes, lost skis, all the spacing was gone, all the procedures were out the window. And as more people made that right turn instead of that left turn, I started to get more and more upset. And by the time they got down there, I kind of lost it on them.
Welcome to Delivering Adventure. This is the podcast that explores what it really takes to share adventure like a pro, with your friends, your family, and as a profession. My name is Chris Capio, and I'm coming to you from Whistler, British Columbia.
And I'm Jordy Shepherd, recording from Canmore, Alberta. After a lifetime of working extensively in different parts of the adventure guiding industry, Chris and I have teamed up to launch this podcast. In each episode, you will hear top adventure guides, managers, marketers, and athletes share their best stories, advice, and trade secrets. The goal of this podcast is to share how you can take yourself and others farther from the mountains to the office and beyond. One of the hardest situations that a leader can find themselves in is managing a group that isn't doing what the leader wants. It could be kids who forgot what their instructor told them, teenagers who are ignoring their teacher on purpose, or adults who misunderstood what their guide said. Regardless of the reason, these situations can be frustrating for leaders and can pose safety risks to everyone in a dangerous situation. It goes without saying that when these situations arise, a leader's stress level can go up. This can lead us to doing and saying things in a way that can lead to conflict and damaged relationships. In future episodes, we will explore some different leadership styles like coaching and hands-off. However, in this episode, we're going to focus in on an approach we can take to communicate more effectively when we are under stress. While leadership styles are important when it comes to leading groups and building teams, the communication style we choose to use can make a far more immediate impact. To start this conversation off, we're going to hear from Erin Tierney, who shares a story from her heli-ski guiding career, where the communication style she chose to use led to conflict within the group she was guiding.
Erin is a certified CSGA ski guide and the current president of the Canadian Ski Guide Association. In addition to guiding in the heli-ski industry since 1999, Erin is a guide trainer and examiner with the Canadian Ski Guide Institute. Erin currently works as the general manager of Whistler Heli-Skiing. Erin joined us back in episode 4 of this season to share her perspective on what it takes to be a leader. After we hear Erin's story, Jordy and I are going to share some strategies and effective leadership communication styles that we can use that can help us through these types of situations. And a quick reminder, if you haven't already done so, make sure you hit the follow button in your audio player or subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you don't miss out on future episodes. Here is Erin, who came to us from Pemberton, BC.
Yeah, so we were talking about leadership, and a big part of leadership is, of course, effective communication. And so this story relates back to communication styles and a really important lesson that I learned early on in my guiding career, thanks to some really helpful guests that I had a great relationship with. One of my very first groups that I skied with as a tail guide was this group of 10 American businessmen, some very strong personalities in the group, as well as some wanderers, people that like to go and find their own line. And it was always a guess as to whether they were all going to end up at the pickup together. So it really kept me on my toes as a tail guide, and developed quite a great relationship with them, though, over the years. The very first year I skied with them, our guide outfits were one-piece suits that tended to absorb water a lot more than they repelled it. And 2 weeks after they left, I received a package in the mail that was full of Nick Wax waterproofing materials. So, we developed a good relationship right off the start, and they were looking out for me and I was looking out for them in the mountains, and we skied for a couple of years together as a tail guide. And when I got my guiding certification, they requested me to start guiding them, which was great. One day we were out skiing in this area that I hadn't skied in before, really big, steep, convoluted tree-lined terrain, really undulating, so kind of hard to see long distances where you're going. You really kind of had to rely on the tracks in front of you as a guest following as to see where to go. And as I flew in, I looked at the run. My lead guide called me and gave me quite specific instructions as to where to ski. So when I got my group in position and I said, okay, we're going to ski down to this hump here, I'll wave my pole. This is the spot where we're going to make a hard left. You're going to follow those tracks down, and I'll see you a little lower down. Make sure you go left. And so, I skied down, got to the bottom. Another one or two guests followed me. And then I started to watch guest number 3 or 4 come down, skied down to the hump, and right turn. Completely skied away from the tracks that were, I thought, fairly obvious to follow, and started making their way down the right side. Had a great time, hooting and hollering, loving life. But as more and more came down, and some of the weaker skiers came down, there were wipeouts, crashes, lost skis. All the spacing was gone. All the procedures were out the window. And as more people made that right turn instead of that left turn, I started to get more and more upset. And by the time they got down there, I kind of lost it on them. And I was, one, I was fearful that something was going to happen on the slope. And then 2, I was fearful that I was going to get in trouble from my lead guide that afternoon when they saw where we had skied instead of following his explicit instructions. And so I kind of let that out on my guests, and I said, "What the heck were you guys thinking? You got to follow me. I told you we needed to go left here. You went right. You led the whole group astray. This was really dangerous where you went. All these things could have happened, and we can't do that." And they all just kind of, this loud, boisterous, normally group just kind of stopped and looked at me, and they went silent, like a bunch of little boys being punished. They had their chins down in their cuff of their jacket, and they basically stopped talking to me and kind of mopily got into the helicopter, and we went for another run and then a couple more runs after that for the rest of the afternoon. And they kind of, they weren't talking to me anymore. And I was a little bit blown away. I thought, maybe I would give them heck, and then they would get over it and we'd keep skiing and everything would be great. But that didn't happen that way. And I was kind of lost as to what to do. But one of the group members, one of the leaders of the group, really successful business person, had a bunch of older kids of his own, so I was probably similar in age to one of his kids, being about 24 years old. And he took me aside and he said, "Erin, I understand that you were upset that some people went that way, and maybe that scared you, but you can't talk to us like that. We are your guests, and we, you're looking out for us, but we are not going to absorb the information that you're giving us when you yell at us." And he said, if in business, as a leader, people mess up with me all the time, and if I sat there and yelled at them and shamed them and blamed them, I would get nothing out of them, and we wouldn't have a productive business operation. So, you can have the same effective message delivery if you do it in a different way. And so from there, we talked about what those effective strategies could be and how to get buy-in from the group. And still, he wasn't discounting the fact that safety can't be compromised, but he was encouraging me to work on a different delivery system, which is quite different from what I had experienced as a young guide, from the, a lot of blame and shame, and from lead guides. If you made a mistake, it was quite often that you got the finger poked at you and criticized, sometimes in front of the whole group, which was really demoralizing. And what it did was make you kind of stop listening. And so you missed any valuable learning information that was maybe coming from the guide that was giving you heck, because you're thinking about how badly you were being embarrassed. And so the message is kind of lost that way. And I think the same thing happened for my guests at that time. So that was different from what I was used to. And I'm really thankful that I had that information shared with me at that point in my career, because I was able to take that forward and try that out on different groups of guests, and also to share that with students in our courses, and it was a few things he told me that I kind of gleaned on my own as well too. That one, if your guests aren't following you, before you turn and blame them, look at yourself and think about the instructions that you gave, and try and recognize if there's a way that you could have potentially delivered those instructions in a better way that was more clear. Sometimes as a guide, we have so much going on in our heads that we try and spew it all out for the guests to understand, and it just is overwhelming for them. And they tend to hear the first thing and the last thing, and everything in the middle is completely forgotten, because they're so excited to get out there and ski or whatever it is you're doing. So really be brief with your instructions, have a look at how you're delivering that information, and take that ownership yourself. And when you speak to your guest, your client, offer that up as a bit of an entrance to the conversation, as in, hey, Chris, maybe I wasn't 100% clear up there, and I apologize for that. What I wanted you to do there was this, and the reason why is because we're avoiding this hazard over here. So it's really important that you follow me. And if you don't understand my instructions or I'm not clear, then please let me know before I ski away, so that we can continue to ski this fun terrain and keep everybody safe. And that's kind of the first step. And then of course, Chris, if you keep going off on your own program, then you can use the group to do a little enforcement for you. Like, hey, if Chris keeps going over, ending up at the wrong pickup, we're going to have to go ski some much simpler terrain. And that's usually all it takes, and the whole group is going to be like, come on, Chris, like let's get it together and end up at the pickup so we can ski more. And I don't find that it ever usually goes past that. Usually the first time is enough. Maybe you have to use the group a little bit sometimes. And of course, the third time you need to introduce more consequences. If someone truly is not listening and going against everything you say, then yeah, you need to ramp that up and from a safety issue. But in general, you're not dealing with that. You're dealing with people that are just so in awe or overwhelmed about where they are, and they're so excited to be there that it's really hard to absorb information. And so giving clear instructions, and if they're not following you, to give feedback in a way that people can listen and understand, and the way that you kind of take some ownership of it yourself as well, helps it be more easily absorbed by them if they know that it's not 100% their fault, even if it is. So yeah, that's something, an experience that I had early on, and found really helpful in how to deliver feedback in a productive way. And I will say that that's delivering feedback to a guest. And I had a similar experience delivering feedback to a couple of guides when I was starting out lead guiding. I thought the thing to do is drag them in the office and tell them everything that they did wrong. And that same kind of history repeats itself. And yeah, that didn't work either. And it wasn't a productive conversation. And I went back after and apologized and let them know that I was trying to come at them from a good place. But the stress of the situation was a lot. And the culture that I had kind of grown up in was also something that led to that delivery as well. And so after having a couple of different experiences like that, I realized that I needed to change my delivery in order to be productive to the group, and and respectful as well. Yeah, and I should say that I went and to the group and apologized for my delivery after that experience, and after my chat with Mike, who was the group member that shared his wisdom with me. And we had a great discussion afterwards, because they recognized what was going on too, and the learning that I had, and we went on to have many years of good skiing together. And it just, it was an actual opportunity for our relationship as a group to grow stronger as well. And they, also got a better understanding of my position and the responsibilities that I have in looking after them through that whole process. So it did end up to be a positive experience. But thanks to the leadership of that group member, Mike, who helped me out and explained some lessons of life to me at that point. So it's it was a good experience in the end, one that I've kept with me for this whole time. So I do want to say too that, throughout these conversations, we've talked about leadership, and, from a fairly soft, skill development side of things. But I do want to acknowledge that we operate in the guiding world in a sometimes in very tight constraints, where you do need to make decisions and commands that, with a split second's notice. And there is a lot of risk involved that's managed every day by the professionals in our industry. And being able to give clear, concise directions and receive those directions and respond to them is a huge part of our risk management. And I think that these skills that we've been talking about today are skills that we work on throughout our lifetime of careers, and knowing the difference of when to be soft and when to be direct. I will say that I think the delivery given in my early days from guides, I understand where it's coming from. Like, I think I said this before, they, obviously lots of experience, seen trauma along the way, seeing a potential, lesson to be learned, but getting away with it, and wanting to make sure that we learn from those lessons is really important. The delivery could have been a little bit better. I know as a parent of a human and of a dog, that yelling doesn't work either way. Nobody responds, no human, no animal responds to being yelled at, not even a bear. Really. So, I don't think that's the tactic, but certainly being able to speak and deliver in a firm, concise manner is a skill that also needs to be developed as well. And that's an art as well, to be firm yet approachable, and as well as is another skill to work on.
Okay, Chris, what came to mind as you listened to that story? Have you ever been faced with a similar situation?
Jordy, yes, I have. I've been both the giver and receiver of approaches that were not effective due to them being too autocratic and direct. One situation that has always stuck with me happened to me around 30 years ago. Early on in my ski teaching career, I was working at a small resort in the interior of British Columbia. One day, the ski school director took a bunch of us on a training session where he wanted to do some video of us skiing so that he could use it to give us some feedback. This was pre-GoPro and smartphone, so the video camera he had was fairly large and not overly sophisticated. There was about 10 of us there with the director, who was named Jim. For whatever reason, Jim wanted us to make a specific turn in a specific place so that he could film it. I don't think any of us knew what he actually wanted us to do, as his instructions were not very clear. Of course, he had to pick me to go first. Not surprisingly, I didn't do what Jim wanted, and he flipped out on me in front of everyone. Then he made a big production of moving everybody down the run so he could set up and do it again. Then, to my astonishment, he chose me to go first once again, without clarifying what he actually wanted me to do or correcting what I did wrong. Once again, I failed to execute what Jim wanted me to do, This sent him into a meltdown. Jim went on to berate me in front of all of my colleagues for quite some time. The thing is, though, he didn't make me look bad. He made himself look bad. In that moment, his staff could see that he was behaving poorly, and they lost respect for him because of it. What I've learned is that when we go out of our way to save face by taking out our frustration at the expense of the ego of others, we are usually the ones that pay the price in the long run. This is an example of the old school way of communicating that Erin was talking about. I would say it has no place now, and there is no reason to speak to anyone in a way that disparages them. Jordy, have you ever been in a situation where you were stressed or under pressure and had to give someone corrective instructions? And if so, how did you do it?
Well, Chris, I must admit, at times I've probably given instructions more like Erin spoke about there, from a bit more of an authoritative viewpoint, and then had to back down on that later. But one story I can think of was heli ski guiding in the Monashee Mountains, small group, and we were missing one of our guests, longtime guest of ours. Not that that matters because they're all important to us. And he's missing, and we can't find him. And we fortunately, we could follow some tracks, and so we finally find a track, and it takes us down a ways into the valley, closer to the valley bottom, and this track's still going, and then we come across this fellow Tim in the cut block. So it's an open area where the trees were cut over and haven't grown back yet, so we can actually see him standing over halfway out in this cut block, probably a few hundred meters from us. So like, okay, we can stand down, call on the radio, tell the helicopter he doesn't need to lift, and go looking for Tim. I've got him, but I don't know what's going on because he's not responding to me, but he is standing there. He just doesn't see me. So I'll report back by radio. And so go skiing over to him, and I tap him on the shoulder. He's looking away. He still doesn't know I'm there. And I scared the heck out of him. He had no idea I was there. And I'm like, Tim, what's up? We were looking for you. He's like, just a second, he says. And he takes off his full face helmet that he would ski with, because he liked to have good protection. And he takes that off, and he's kind of all sweaty underneath because he's been walking a little bit through this cut block looking for us. We've been looking for him. And I said something else to him, and he says, just a second. And he pulls some earplugs out of his ears. Now he can hear me. Finally. We've been yelling in the forest, looking for him in the trees. And he says, yeah, sorry, I couldn't hear you. I had these earplugs in. And so I thought about being pretty strict with him there. Like, I was just disbelieving. Like, why would you ski down with earplugs in? You already have this full face helmet on, and you can't hear well anyways with that. And but I was really intrigued, and he's quite an interesting guy. And I just said, Tim, why the earplugs? He says, well, I heli ski 6 weeks a year, right? And I see you all wearing hearing protection around the helicopter. So I decided to do that too. I want to protect my hearing. And I said, yeah, Tim, that's fine. But you can't do that when you're skiing down. We need to have communication with you. He's like, oh, okay. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. So we got it all sorted out, got him back to the helicopter, and carried on skiing for the day. But yeah, I was initially going to lose it on him because of my fears that he was upside down in a tree well, he was dead, grizzly bear had come out of hibernation and eaten him or something, right? And yeah, it all worked out good in the end. And yeah, I used it as a bit of a learning experience for myself to just say, okay, I'm going to take a couple steps down here and just see what happened from his perspective.
Yeah, that's funny. That's funny, Jordy. What I tend to find is that there are two common leadership communication styles that people use. The one I prefer is to lead with a soft touch backed up by a hard edge. When we lead this way, we rely on gentle persuasion and selling to start. This can involve including people in decision-making, subtly guiding them towards choices you want them to make, and generally being flexible and showing some tolerance for mistakes. However, if that doesn't work, we aren't afraid to resort to a more autocratic telling style. This is where the hard edge comes in. Without the hard edge or limit, we stop being a leader and can become the follower. In Erin's case, she defaulted to the second, more common style, which is to lead with a hard edge and then follow with a soft touch. This soft touch is often used to provide first aid to any damage to relationships and ego that was caused by being more direct, abrupt, or autocratic to begin with. In Erin's case, one of her clients made her aware of the damage that was caused and helped to coach her on how to use that soft touch, which isn't always obvious or intuitive. I personally find that leading with a soft touch gets better results, but there isn't always a place for it.
You're right, Chris. When safety is an issue and people aren't responding to the use of a softer touch, or you simply need to get something done quickly, leading with a harder or more direct, more autocratic communication style can work better and can get faster results. For example, in rescue situations, we're quite direct with communication between rescuers or from the rescuers to a pilot. So you can imagine if you're on rope or you're hanging on a sling line under a helicopter, there's not a lot of like sort of pleases and thank yous going on. It's more up 1 meter or down rope or stop. There's not a lot of prettiness to it all, right? And that's expected because literally the pausing in the could you please do something, starting their sentence with that, the thing could have already happened. And if you're getting lowered down on the end of a rope, you're the rescue attendant in a rope rescue situation, you could be well past where you wanted to be by the time you actually communicate. And then in guiding certain situations, you are pretty autocratic with your instructions. And I would argue that short roping is one of those situations where you're constantly having your client stop or sit or put a turn of the rope around a rock or stand up and start climbing. And you're doing that like sometimes hundreds of instructions on a ridge, and you're not doing a whole lot of pretty please or it'd be great if you could do this. It's stand there, sit down, okay, start climbing, those kind of directions. But it's not to be mean, it's just to be direct.
So, Jordy, we talked a bit about communication styles that leaders can use. Are there some strategies that we should be aware of if we find ourselves in a situation similar to Erin's where we need to give someone some corrective feedback?
Yeah, Chris, there's definitely a few that come to mind. First off, I like to, whenever I'm instructing or guiding in any type of situation, is I try and set a set of default instructions or directions to my clients. And that takes a lot of the guesswork out of it for them. And it means I don't need to repeat myself, all the way through the day and all the way through multiple days. So yeah, using heli ski guiding as an example, or ski tour guiding for that matter. When I'm skiing down a pitch and I've regrouped with my crew, I don't need to always say, okay, just stay close to my tracks as I ski away from them, because I've told them at the start of the trip, just stay close to my tracks and I'll tell you otherwise if I want you to do something else. If I want you to stay on the left side of my tracks, or I want you to only go left at the point where I wave my ski pole down there, those sorts of things. And I find the people tend to pay a little bit more attention then when I do speak. And then I can use the rest of my time with my guests after I've given those default instructions. If I'm not giving a specific instruction, especially related to safety of the team, then I can just actually talk about the beautiful views and what a great time we're having, and tell some funny stories and that sort of thing, right? The second thing is explaining why we want people to do certain things. So going back to your story with Jim, if Jim had actually explained to you what he was trying to achieve, it would have made more sense to everyone. And yeah, maybe you would have got all done in the first take and there would have been less yelling. And thirdly, taking ownership of the initial instructions, as Erin touched on. When it comes to communication, we need to remember that we can't always just blame the receiver of the message if they don't understand. We need to be aware of the fact that if people don't understand or do what we want, we may not have communicated things as well as we could. On this point, it's important to always keep in mind that people tend to remember the last thing they hear more than anything else. So if we want people to focus on certain instructions, especially the ones that relate to directions and safety, we need to position them last. And we also need to possibly just speak less and communicate less. And then when we have something to say, they're paying attention. We may also need to repeat instructions. It can also be beneficial to have people repeat instructions back to us so that we are clear that they understood. Investigating why people did what they did can also be very helpful when it comes to diffusing tension. Sometimes we can jump to conclusions without taking the time to investigate or trying to understand someone's situation so we can learn why they made the decisions they made. And that, going back to my story about Tim in the cut block there with the earplugs in, I could have yelled at him all I wanted, and he still wouldn't have heard me because he had earplugs in. And so it took me taking a moment to investigate and figuring out what was going on, and then I fully realized the situation, and we corrected it.
Yeah, Jordy, on this last point, I totally hear what you're saying. I've got another example of this as well. I was on an outward bound course that I took many years ago, and our group was ski touring west of Pemberton in early June. The instructor was concerned about the stability of the snow on one part of the slope that we were on and told us to avoid that area by turning before we got there. We all had heavy packs on, and the snow was deep and heavy, and the skis back then were really skinny. We were also using mountaineering boots instead of ski boots, so everything was hard. Adding to this was the fact that most of the group were not very strong skiers. So not surprisingly, one of the group members went past where the instructor wanted them to turn and started to enter the area, which was a gully that the instructor was concerned about. As she kept going, the instructor started to become quite direct, and you could tell he was stressed. The student eventually made the turn and everything was fine. When the instructor confronted the student, she told him that she wasn't ignoring his instructions. She just couldn't turn fast enough because of her big pack and the deep snow and everything like that. So in this case, the instructor, who was Dave Sarkany, was super professional and started the conversation by asking what happened instead of leading with criticism. This is something that we should all remember to do, but it can be hard to do when we're under stress or people have continually ignored our instructions.
Good point, Chris. Another factor in Erin's situation was that it wasn't the whole group that went the wrong way. It was actually one person who then became the new leader for everyone else. This is a reminder that when the person who is officially leading the group leaves that group, then they need to make sure that the next person knows exactly what to do, where to go, where not to go, where to stop, and so on. I've seen it a number of times where my group either went off course or kept going when I wanted them to drop in a certain spot. When I've asked them what happened, it is common for the group to point the finger at someone in the group who they just followed. For example, we were just following Bob. If you ask Bob why he went the wrong way, he will usually tell you he either did what he thought you said or maybe that he just forgot. I will sometimes use the game of telephone as a communication tool, but you got to remember that can go sideways. But when the group is spread out or the rest of the group hasn't arrived, once I have rapport with clients, I will say, I'm going to keep going and make sure you tell the next person in line to do this. But I'll keep the instructions very simple in that case and ask it to be passed all the way back down. When you're guiding a fairly large group, that's sometimes the best way to keep things moving. But you got to remember to keep the instructions simple. So this brings us to the end of another episode. Our thanks to Erin for sharing this story. It takes a strong leader to share mistakes, and we really appreciate her humility, which is a key trait of being a great leader. If you haven't already done so, we encourage you to check out Erin's first episode, where she talked about some of the other things that go into being the leader. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your social network. The more listeners we can attract, the more content we can bring you. We posted an easily shareable Linktree link in the show notes. Thanks so much for listening.